So perhaps we can start with the event as people are still joining in. Well, let me first introduce myself. I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. My name is Alisa Vlasic, and I'm a Nets4Dem project manager under a joint position between CoGlobal and People Power. So this is going to be a launch event for our very first Democratic Innovations Accelerator under the Nets4Dem, and I'm going to be your moderator for the day. So while people are still joining in, I would just kindly ask you to introduce yourself in the chat, to say hello, write the organization name, your location, where you're coming from. Also, throughout today's event, just please feel free to ask questions in the chat window. We will have a short Q&A session right before the end, so after all the presentations, and we will answer as many questions as possible within this event. Also, we are going to send you the presentation and the recording in an email right after the event, okay? So for today's session, the agenda is the following. So after the introductions, we are going to do a bit of an introduction to Nets4Dem and to the topic of democratic innovations. What do we actually mean by a democratic innovation? And then we are going to introduce the Democratic Innovation Accelerator. We are going to hear a little bit more about the lessons learned from the previous accelerators that have taken place. And we will hear a success story from Grenoble Alps Metropola. And at the end, we will close it with how to apply to the Democratic Innovations Accelerator. And then we will follow up with the Q&A session to see on your questions. So we are having 4 speakers with us today. So Paul Zobkov is here with us from Democracy Reporting International. We have Sahib Singh from Demos Helsinki, Zoe Wilkins from People Power, and Caroline Schlenker from Grenoble Alps Metropole. Before I give the floor to the first speaker today, I would like to quickly introduce People Power and CoGlobal, leading organizations for this Democratic Innovations Accelerator. So People Power is a global hub for participatory democracy with a mission to expand people's power to make governmental decisions by supporting organizations and governments that are building participatory democracy around the world. While CoGlobal is a Spanish-based organization, and it promotes participatory democracy through the design of actions and by linking innovation with good practices and focusing on inclusion of underrepresented groups such as youth and children in participatory processes. Well, now I would like to actually get into the topic of today, and I would like to invite our first speaker, Paul Zobkov, manager in Europe for Democracy Reporting International. Paul leads the strategic and programmatic work for DRI across Europe and previously oversaw DRI's digital democracy efforts worldwide. He will introduce key features of Nets4Dem project that is actually a funding project of this accelerator. Paul. Unmute, please.
You would think after all the years of post-COVID world. Thank you, Alisa. Welcome everybody to this event. We were very much looking forward to this and to having you all join us. Can we have the next slide, please? As we start off, let me introduce a little bit Nets4Dem, which is led by Democracy Reporting International, which is my organization in coordination and support with many other organizations that you will find out more about. So what is Nets4Dem? Nets4Dem is basically a network of networks on democratic innovation for policymakers, practitioners, and researchers. We understand that, given the current challenges across Europe with poly crisis, the erosion of trust, the growing polarization, what we need is more imaginative ways for democracy and participation of citizens and generally people across Europe. And this is the root of Nets4Dem. We want to do many things drawing on the strengths of these three groups of actors: the practitioners, the researchers, and of course the policymakers that should be enabled by these groups. And you will see in this little diagram on the right that we have a rich tapestry, and that reflects the diversity of networks, the diversity of connections and perspectives that each of these groups bring, and that we try to innovate democracy together. Next slide, please. So what does Nets4Dem do? At its core, we look to strengthen our joint capacity to implement innovative democracy initiatives at local, national, and European levels. This goes also for participatory democracy, this goes for civics education, and many other similar initiatives. Among this all, we try to consolidate knowledge. So, for example, in the course of this project of the next 3 years that is being funded by Horizon Europe program, we will be developing an online resource center that will involve a curated selection of the top tools, guides, and materials on democratic innovation in at least 15 languages. We'll also have an online knowledge database that will consolidate the results of over 300 EU-funded research projects on democratic innovation, and also recommendations from civil society across the EU. We'll also have the practical guide tool that helps practitioners and policymakers to develop step-by-step plans for implementing participatory initiatives in their individual contexts. This participation playbook draws on the work already done by for the European context. Apart from this, we are of course also looking to build capacity of the members and the broader field. All of you are participating in the current event, which is of course for the Democracy Accelerator, and you will find out more about that in the course of the day. But then there's also the Rising Stars Mentorship Program, which looks to support the implementation of democratic initiatives by new practitioners in the field. And apart from consolidating knowledge, building capacity, we also want to develop solutions, practicable solutions for use. And this will also include democracy labs, bringing together policymakers and practitioners to co-create and test innovative approaches, and also high-level policy dialogues and retreats, helping policymakers to translate academic knowledge and practice and embark and embed on democratic innovations in local existing governance structures. Next slide, please. So who's involved? So the project, Network of Networks for Democracy, or Nets4Dem, is being founded by these following organizations that you see before you. A number of these are networks or umbrella organizations with a diversity of members. And this is a deliberate approach that we have taken to enable growth and scaling at speed. So, for example, organizations like the European Partnership for Democracy, People-Powered, Eurocities, and some others, they have vast dispersed networks. Other organizations also operate in multiple countries. Can you please do next slide? Thank you. So if we're looking at the moment, what do these initial membership organizations cover? We cover already 200 cities, over 50 think tanks and universities, and over 300 civil society organizations active in 38 countries in Europe. It is one important thing to note that, of course, Horizon projects, they support not only the EU member states, but also Horizon affiliated countries, which include those in the Balkans, for example, Turkey, Caucasus, and also some in the MENA region and beyond. So what we're looking to achieve with this, yes, we're starting with a focus on Europe, but also with a much broader outlook, and also looking to connect to the global efforts, for example, as led by People-Powered. Next slide, please. So what's in it for you? We would love for you and your institutions to join Nets4Dem as we move forward on this. And the tangible benefits is basically you will get to access global best practices and latest tools on democratic engagement, which will be hopefully of use for your work. You'll get to collaborate with experts to craft solutions tailored to your local and national needs. And you'll also get a chance to engage in high-level discussions focused on democratic innovations and citizen participation. You will also have a chance to interact with leading researchers and leading civil society alongside other policymakers, creating a beautiful milieu that will be rich in what it produces. So how to get involved? Next slide. At the moment, we are finalizing our membership structure and the offer, and we will be looking to open up for broader membership in June of this year. So please watch out the space on this website. You will also see a variety of other work that's already ongoing under the scope of the project. But do consider joining us for the ride. We would love to have you inside the network, and also, of course, apply to this accelerator on which you will find out more about shortly. Alisa, I think over to you. This is just a general overview of where we're at.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paul. You did a very good overview of Nets4Dem and hopefully inspired a lot of organizations to join in. Just as a reminder, you will receive slides with the links and the rest. And also, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll get back to the questions later on. Now I would like to invite our next speaker, Sahib Singh, a senior expert at Demos Helsinki, a leading Nordic think tank. He works extensively on democratic futures as an essential part of deep societal transitions, one focus of which is the use and embedding of democratic innovations in diverse European governance contexts. So what does that all mean, first of all? So Sahib will get a little bit more in detail about what we actually mean by democratic innovations. As an introduction, before we hear a little bit more about the Democratic Innovations Accelerator. Sahib, floor to you.
Thank you, Elisa, and thank you everyone for joining us, and Paul for the wonderful introduction to Nets4Dem. As Elisa mentioned, Demos Helsinki is looking at democratic innovations across Europe and across very diverse governance contexts. What that has allowed us to do is to see the genuine plurality of what people are doing with democratic innovations, where it works, where it doesn't work, what works best, what doesn't work best. But let's start from some of the basics. So what are democratic innovations? I think for present purposes, we can probably define them as processes that sort of increase and deepen citizen engagement and participation and allow citizens to influence how they're governed in a huge plurality of democratic spaces, whether that's with government, in relation to government, with relation to their local council, with relation to their local CSOs or associations. We've come to sort of understand democratic innovations through certain methods. And some of these methods are new and some of them are very old, but perhaps it ought to be said that democracy itself was, and representative democracy itself, was an innovation in many ways. And a large part of democracy's renewal is the ability to experiment with new methods, new forms, and new possibilities. So the methods that we'll be discussing in the accelerator and beyond, and also in this brief chat, includes participatory budgeting, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, citizens' assemblies, of which have proliferated in the last few years, legislative theatre, participatory policymaking, citizen dialogues, and citizen initiatives. Of course, each one of these methods will involve different levels of participation that apply to different policy problems, and sometimes they'll be used in interconnection with each other. But the first thing I want to do is introduce us to the question of scale and scope. So if we could move to the next slide. So some of you may be aware of Participedia, which is a fabulous collection of democratic innovations across the world. And it's a sort of Wikipedia for democratic innovations. And they've collected over nearly 2,300 cases across the world involving innumerable methods and innumerable organizations. This gives a sense of the fact that we're in very good company, both historically and geographically. People are reimagining democracy everywhere, all the time. So what we're doing, we're not doing alone. What we're doing is also something that takes inspiration from other places. And I noticed that in our chat, we've got people from Vienna, Bolton, Iceland, Mozambique, Montenegro, South Africa. And there's a lot that we can learn here in Europe from a lot of those places. If we move to the next slide, we'll also see the types of problems and the types of scope that comes with democratic innovation. So the OECD last year has updated its collection on the types of problems that democratic innovations can be used to deal with. And we see here that at the moment, the environment is at sort of the peak levels of expectation. But what we tend to find is democratic experiments and democratic innovations very much depend on problems that are both local and societal at the same time. So yes, there can be democratic innovations on climate change and the climate crisis in the UK, but of course, it's very much about understanding how that affects citizens' everyday lives and how their everyday lives can be changed. And it's the connection between the local and the societal that democratic innovations tries to intervene. Now, perhaps one way to look at this and to appreciate the diverse contexts and rationales for democratic innovations, we can look at three particular examples. So if you move to the next slide. So here I'm going to go from right to left. So there are some examples that you'll be very aware of. So for example, Ireland's Citizen Assembly on abortion that concluded in 2018 that led to a referendum. This Citizens Assembly looked at an extremely divisive issue for Irish citizens. There was a change in the constitutional construct with how Ireland came to deal with this particular problem. And the recommendations of the Citizens Assembly was eventually put to a referendum and allowed for a national debate. So here the democratic innovation functioned in two ways. One was to amplify existing opinions and to amplify societal debate. And the second was to allow a change in the constitution through a form of direct democracy. Here, of course, we're functioning a little bit at the national level, but if we go to the second example, the People's Plan for Nature in the UK, we see a very, very different context and a very different way in which democratic innovations can work. So whilst with Ireland, the idea was to change policy at a national level and a governmental level, the Citizens' Assembly for the People's Plan was to well, first of all, it was established by three conservation bodies, the National Trust, the RSPC, and the WWF. And the purpose was to provide citizens with a voice that would inform the advocacy of civil society organizations. So the point here wasn't necessarily to change state practices or state policy in the short run, but it was to inform advocacy from the civil society side and allow civil society to remain closely connected to the needs and requirements of citizens all across the UK when it came to nature and biodiversity. And then finally, the third example is Messina, Italy. And here we found there were very, very different approaches. And it was very much a more bottom-up approach, and it was a combination of approaches. And I think we're going to hear more about this a little bit later on. In Messina, participatory budgeting was used alongside exploratory walks to foster inclusion. There was the element of citizens and policymakers going to parts of the city that they'd never been to before to have discussions about what was happening on the ground in terms of excluded minorities, in terms of ongoing migration issues, and a continuous set of dialogues that allowed people to expand beyond their own immediate lived experience. It was completely, in the end, citizen-led, in the sense that they came up with a range of democratic values that they wanted to govern themselves with and to govern citizen participation with. So hopefully through these three examples, what we can see is that democratic innovations, they have different reasons, they have different rationales behind them, they have a whole range of different actors, And above all, what works very much depends on local needs and local context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sahib. I love your last sentence, and hopefully it will really stay with all our participants. The democratic innovations really depends on local challenges, local context. So this is something that I would like everybody to leave this webinar as well afterwards. So keep that in mind while we're moving forward. But before I introduce the accelerator program, I would like to hear a little bit more from our participants. So what is the main challenge when thinking about starting a participatory program? So what are your main challenges? Please write them in the chat. I would like to hear a little bit more about your local context, about your local challenges that you are facing at the moment, that perhaps you are thinking about solving them through the accelerator. So if you can just take a minute and write in the chat what is the main challenge when thinking about starting a participatory program. Political buy-in. Yeah. I would say one of the quite common to start with, raise public authorities' awareness of the issues and how methodology and certification of participants. Money, Matteo, probably money in organizing, or I would assume political will, yes. Challenge in Montenegro, lack of municipal willingness to participate and involve citizens. Grassroots deep listening to marginalized communities, expertise, methodologies, money again. Bella says persuading people to bother engaging, making the time. So how to engage people within their busy lives, a very, very big challenge. So as you are writing these challenges and just going through them right now, just quickly going through them, I can actually see that all these challenges are something that we had in mind while we were creating this program, the Democratic Innovations Accelerator, while creating the curriculum, the courses that would help you with solving these challenges. So moving now forward with the presentation, I would like to introduce the accelerator just to give you a broad general idea about what is the Democratic Innovations Accelerator. I would start, actually continue after Sahib's presentation in regard to what we mean by democratic innovations. I will not repeat what he said. His presentation was brilliant in giving the context of democratic innovations. I would just like to emphasize maybe that we are aiming at methods that enhance the engagement, the participation, the influence of citizens in the democratic processes locally. And that we are thinking of both ways. One, the adaptation of traditional democratic mechanisms, as well as developing of new approaches. So being it's an innovation does not mean that we do not rely on the traditional democratic mechanisms as the basis, as Sahib also mentioned a couple of times within his presentation. So in the nutshell, what this program is, it is, if we move, yes, so it's a 6-month action-oriented support program that guides you through the development of a participatory democracy program that is tailored to your local needs. So you come to the program with your challenge that you are actually going through the accelerator, through the 6-month program, support program, where you receive, I will go a little bit more in depth of the support that you are receiving through the accelerator. And you are actually finishing this program with a step-by-step action plan on how to implement this project locally. We are supporting you through, okay, so who is this program for? We are aiming at 2 core groups here. One is the governmental staff members, the officials and the policymakers that seek to implement or improve participatory program. So just to highlight, to implement a participatory program or to improve the participatory program. So both to develop and to implement or to improve. And on the other side, we are also focusing on staff of civil society organizations or coalitions that support or advocate for public participation in government decision-making. As we heard before from the examples that Sahib mentioned, but also we will hear even more later on as we move along today, all these programs to be implemented and to be sustainable in a local community, they do entitle a certain partnership between the governments and the civil society organizations. And this is the reason why we are highly, highly encouraging that you apply with one or the other within this program. So if you are a civil society organization, it would be good if you are partnering with government staff members, with a city, with a municipality, that is going to support you throughout the program and later on support your implementation within the local area. Moving forward. So within this accelerator program, we will select 40 participants within the first cohort. As we mentioned previously, when Paul represented the Nets4Dem program, this program, the eligibility is a little bit beyond only EU countries. So the eligibility of the accelerator is also beyond only EU countries. So it's EU and the Horizon Europe countries. I will not read all the Horizon Europe countries. You can see them in the slides. So it also includes the Balkan area as well as the only EU. Moving forward. Okay, so the three key pillars of how we can support you through this accelerator are the guided expert mentorship and the peer-to-peer learning, the step-by-step resources, and the self-paced training for implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. What does this mean for you? So going on the first one, the guided expert mentorship and peer-to-peer learning, you will be receiving a mentor that is going to guide you and support your work throughout the 6 months of the implementation of the accelerator. You will have 5 mentoring sessions, one-on-one sessions with your mentor, with a leading expert of the field that you are going to work your program on, that is going to support the development of your action plan. And also within the group, the cohort of 40 participants, we will organize the peer learning that is going to be an international peer learning for you to discuss your projects within an open forum. The second pillar, focusing on the step-by-step resources, we have 2 key resources. One is the participation playbook, which is an online tool that covers 4 different participation methodologies: the participatory budgeting, the participatory policymaking, the citizens' assemblies, and the theater, the legislative theater. So with this tool, you are actually creating a step-by-step action plan. And within all the stages that you need to create along your journey, this tool creates a very user-friendly PDF format document that you can share with your team, that you can share with other organizations locally while you are implementing your program. And the other resource is the online resource center, also within the People Power website. And this is a curated selection of tools. You can find here templates, presentations, guidelines, guidebooks, so different types of tools that can aid and support your work as you are moving along through the learning process, but also through the implementation process. Through Nets4Dem, we are now in a search of even more tools that are applicable for the European context and that are in European languages. So this is something that we are also working on. And very soon, within a month or 2, you will find even more resources on European languages. And moving to the third pillar, the self-paced training for implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So there are going to be 4 practice-oriented live sessions. By this, I mean through Zoom, or some other platform where there is going to be an expert leading on a certain topic, and you will have an opportunity to discuss with the whole cohort and to exchange on the knowledge. And the whole accelerator is going to be also led and follow your work through a training platform with online courses. And this can be self-paced at your own time, and you can go through the platform in a very practical manner and with a quite user-friendly platform. So moving forward, this is how the participant journey looks like. So the live sessions, you will have 4 live sessions throughout the program. The mentorship, first you will set up some program goals, then you will work on the plan and the questions, you will be reviewing the plan, get the approval from your mentor, and at the end you will finalize action plan. As you see, there is going to be a mentor that is going to follow you throughout the whole process. The playbook, the online tool that I mentioned, this is somewhere where you will start developing your action plan. And then by the end of the program, you will actually have a PDF document, a finalized action plan for you to use. And the training platform, a self-paced courses that you are going to complete. You will be sharing some progress with your peers, and you can track program process. The whole program starts in October 2024. And it should finish with you having an action plan document by March 2025. Today is the day when the application is open. Within last slides, you will also receive the link where to apply. The deadline is going to be on June 27. This is the application deadline, and you will find a notification sometime mid-July. The onboarding will start, but we will start with the program after the summer. So starting from October, the program will kick off. Okay. Perfect. So we have heard now a little bit more information about the Nets4Dem program, about what we mean by democratic innovations. You've also heard about the Democratic Innovations Accelerator. But since People Power is implementing accelerators for a couple of cohorts now, I wanted to invite Zoe Wilkins to tell us a little bit more about the lessons learned from previous accelerator programs. Zoe is the Climate Democracy Associate, and she supports the participatory climate democracy work at People Power. And this includes the Climate Democracy Accelerator that perhaps you have heard of, which supports civil society and government to design together plans for climate action. Zoe?
Thanks, Alyssa. Hi, everyone. So as Alyssa mentioned, I've been working on our accelerator model. The accelerator model focuses its support around the participation playbook as our essential resource and tool through the training sessions, mentorship, resources, and peer networks that Alyssa mentioned. We launched our first accelerator in 2022, and those participants finished in 2023. So we've had 4 cohorts of people through the Climate Democracy Accelerator and Digital Democracy Accelerator coming through our program. And as we've had these cohorts, we've been testing and improving this accelerator model, which is now shaping the Democratic Innovation Accelerator program. So we have had almost 60 participants complete an accelerator program, which means they went through this process, successfully finished their action plan, and are now in the process of launching and delivering their programs. We've had people come from 45 different countries. The Digital Democracy Accelerator, like this one, was a European-based cohort, whereas the Climate Democracy Accelerator focuses on global cohorts. And we've just had 27 people finish in our most recent cohort. And we have just launched a new cohort, which has 17 people currently taking part. So as we do this, we're feeding all of these learnings and lessons into this model as we go. You can see here a quick snapshot of all the people who have participated in our accelerator program. And so it's in all these different contexts, working with different local governments and civil societies and partnerships of both that we've been getting feedback to shape this program and think about how to tailor it. And particularly in this context, what does it mean to have a regional cohort, and how can we build on our learnings to really connect people up? So to give you a bit more of a sense of the kinds of projects people develop in our accelerator programs, very new, the people who just started last month, we have one project happening in Lyon where they are working on tackling climate misinformation through a participatory policy making program with young people. And this is led by civil society. In our Digital Democracy Accelerator program that just finished, we have the team from the Field of Dialogue Foundation in Warsaw developing a citizen story about children's rights in the digital world, centering citizen voices and lived experience in that process. And then we also had a program led in Blagoevgrad, Bulgaria, probably that pronunciation isn't totally correct, focused on how academic settings and how we think about participatory policy making on AI. So you see we have universities leading this kind of work, governments, civil society, and what we really want to do in the accelerators is share these learnings across locations and fields and subject area so that we can think about how to best innovate our democracy and include people within it. So a few lessons learned that I just like to share. The first is that especially in the climate democracy program, as we've had 3 cohorts just in that model, for the first time, we're now actually really focusing in on this partnership piece. What does it mean for a government and civil society organization, not only to support each other's work, but design together through a program like the accelerator model and really collaborate from the outset about their shared vision, about how to shift that relationship and think about how they can innovate together. One interesting thing is that from our first cohort, where resource was the biggest problem that we heard about from program participants who we poll at the end and at the beginning of their journeys, in the most recent cohort, it's external factors that have been the biggest concern for participants, and particularly looking at the year that we have ahead with elections happening all around the world. I think this will continue to be a thread. And so we're really trying to think about, while we have this accelerator model, how can we take into account different circumstances and changing situations, and the mentors that you work with, I think, will really help you do this. The participation playbook, as Alyssa mentioned, is a really great jumping off point. It takes you through a series of questions that you collaborate on with your team. You can add different users, forces you to think about different things about your specific context and the work you're trying to do. But to also remember that it's a jumping off point. You get this action plan, and that's really important. And then it's those training courses and mentorship that also think, well, how do we embed this? How do we start this? What does this look like for us? And then the related piece is how important the peer network aspect is of these accelerators. So yes, you come in with your team to have these resources and tools, but you're also doing it as a cohort with other people who are also trying to think about these issues. And so that's a really core advantage of the accelerator program. And now I think we're going to hear a bit more about what democratic innovation looks like in action. We'll pass back to Alyssa.
Perfect. Thank you, Zoe. I think just these last couple of points that you mentioned, you can actually read through them also within the comments. I just quickly browsed through the comments. And again, I invite the participants to ask questions in the chat. We will have a Q&A session very shortly. So, but now I would like to, as you mentioned, Zoe, I would like to invite our next speaker to actually give us an example of how this works on local ground. So we have heard a bit about how the accelerator works and emphasized throughout the session, I would say, this collaboration between the public administration and the civil societies. And I also see within the comments that a couple of you have mentioned this as a challenge, this collaboration between the two. And now I would like to invite Caroline Schlenker from Grenoble Alps Metropole to tell us a little bit more about their example of implementing democratic innovations locally. And also to give us a bit of an insight of this collaboration as well while implementing a success story locally. Caroline?
Thank you very much, Elisa. Yes,
Thanks.
so as the site says, I comes from Grenoble Alpes Métropole, which is an administration, the very French administration. The métropole is not a city, it's a number of city administrations that decide to pool in their certain competencies and budget together. So next slide, please. this will lead into the context. What is Grenoble-Alpes Métropole and Democratic Innovation? Grenoble-Alpes Métropole was originally 49 cities who decided to merge competencies together in a budget. But the problem, of course, was to make inhabitants understand this new territory, which was to basically shift it between an administrative territory to a democratic territory, to a lived territory that people could understand. In order to do this, immediately when the metropole was created in 2015, we created a context, institutional context for democratic participation. We created citizen participation department on the one hand, and a department for perspective, policy steering, innovation, and evaluation on the second hand. In parallel to this, we put in place the several democratic tools to involve local stakeholders and inhabitants to understand the metropole, to help a sense of belonging, to assess the needs of the inhabitants, and to, of course, set acceptable goals for the metropole that can be understood by the inhabitants. So we installed permanent participative bodies, temporary citizen panels, consultations. We even recently put in place a citizens petition, and tools for evaluation, conferences, information. Also a digital platform that I didn't add on the slide, but basically a number of tools for participation. Next slide, please. So, of course, with all of those things in place, we didn't touch everyone. We didn't touch all the inhabitants, and we knew it. We knew that there were a lot of people that were away from our participation processes, and those that were furthest away from our participation processes that did not touch them at all. So we knew we needed to find ways of getting people who we did not touch through those processes to participate. And we knew that the local actors, the local stakeholders, the NGOs, associations on the ground, the people in touch with the population could help us in doing that. And on the other hand, we had programs where we involved a network of actors, especially one particular one. We involved them on the question of integration of newly come migrants, who told us that they wanted to involve migrant inhabitants in defining reception policies. We do not do that in reception policy making. We don't involve migrant residents at all. And so given those two things, we decided, well, we should really try and see how we can involve the people furthest away from our practices. Why not migrant residents in our integration policy making? And we had a great opportunity, a funding opportunity by the European Union, actually two funding opportunities. One was the UNITES project that we joined in 2019, led by Eurocities. This enabled us to experiment a participatory panel of migrant residents in order to assess and advise local policymaking. And the second project, which we more recently launched, the Master Lab project, we will not talk about it today, but I did want to mention it, led by the city of Mechelen, was enabled us to experiment and implement some policy labs on the topic of our integration strategy. Next slide, please. So, in order to engage migrant inhabitants, so we set up in parallel those two projects. The Agora that you see on the left, the idea was to set up and support with all of our local partners, the associations and the institutions we worked with. So to set up a panel of migrant residents that could evaluate and suggest the implementation and evaluation of the policies that were aimed at all of our migrant residents. And on the other hand, we set up the participative work method, which was the policy labs, with all of the stakeholders involved, associations, institutions, elected officials, and migrants around the policy cycle to improve our integration policies for newcomers. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus more on the Agora and on how we relied on all of our local partners in order to do something we had never done before, was to involve migrant residents in defining our policies. So we relied first on a very strong ecosystem, in fact, of the partners of integration. We worked with local, we worked with a lot of local organizations on just integration actions to promote integration, access to work, access to housing, and different aspects like French classes. And all of those partners for integrations set up what we imagined could be a steering committee for the Agora, which was the panel of migrant residents. And we defined that the steering committee could help us define the roadmap for the Agora, meaning imagining the communication tools to go and reach out for people who would belong to the panel, the recruitment. They actually helped with the recruitment. And the idea with this steering committee was also to decide on the conditions for success of the panel, to help assess the panel's work and to guide the panel. And this is why this steering committee met every 2 months for a year in order to help with the work of the Agora. And on the right, you'll see, well, for example, the first thing we came up with in 2 hours, which was actually the communication tool we used to reach out to the people who would then become Agora members. We did a number of those communication leaflets to give directly to people in 6 different languages. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the first year of the Agora, what was the Agora, or what is the Agora, because it's still going on. In the first year, it was 16 refugee residents, 8 women and 8 men. So they were volunteers. They met once a month over dinner at the Metropole, with guided by one facilitator, one graphic facilitator who did visual renderings of the meetings. All the facilitation was bilingual in 2 languages, and there was also support in capacity building activities to better understand the territory, and also in public speaking, so that they could speak publicly. So they met in plenary sessions, but there were also thematic working groups outside those plenary sessions. The idea was based on their experience as users. The Agora members would do all those things to evaluate the schemes we had in place, to identify the needs of the residents, to provide input into the development of our future integration policies, but also, of course, of the actions of the stakeholders who were following all the work in the steering committee, to help better inform people arriving in the area, to try and help change the way other inhabitants look at refugees, which was also a very important thing for them. Those were, I think, that they actually set out for themselves. I'm not going to get into detail because we don't have the time, but this is kind of a visual rendering of the work they did in the first year. Right now, the Agora has 18 members. We've just recruited the new Agora, actually. But in the first year, they set out to do those things here. So they had their role of representatives. So they took on a different kind of spokespeople role in different spaces. They worked on the evaluation of both our policies and of the actions and the territory by actually meeting all of the people who worked in the field, and also meeting other migrant residents. And also suggesting solutions by actually coming up with all of their work and with the local network of actors and with elected officials in actual solutions, one of which actually came out of some of the work they did themselves in integrating the policy labs. They came with their need for more information. And today we are writing a guide for newcomers, which will be released next month, a new guide that they will read over in the session this month, and they will finalize with a newly recruited staff member. Next slide, please. So in this first year of the Agora, there are so many things that we have learned. So for us, one of the important things is just how important capacity building is to include these residents in participation, how we needed to really make our schemes evolve, our processes evolve in order to integrate a lot more capacity building. And this is true for migrant residents, but not only. Of course, a large amount of the people we need to involve and need a lot more capacity building activities or information processes. Also to understand that there is an issue in terms of literacy and how we talk about and how we involve people in our policy making or participation. We need to think about literacy, levels of literacy when we communicate and when we work with people. We also need to understand how important local actors are in developing participatory practices, because they are the ones in touch directly with the end users or the residents or the people that we need to involve in the fabric of our policies. this idea also of our institutions having a role, or cities having a role in developing those spaces for collaboration between local stakeholders and end users or inhabitants. This idea that it's not just service providers and end users, but it's also perhaps more spaces for collaboration and coming up with solutions together. And that could be a role that we can take. This idea of representatives is always very complicated in participatory processes, but maybe what we've discovered is that the challenge is more to take citizens who come in their individual experience and needs, and who can take on a collective voice through different processes like questionnaires, surveys, and understanding how to take on that collective voice, which is also part of the capacity building. And also, that participation is a part of integration, or I could say also belonging to a territory, which is important. So perhaps just to conclude, and I hope I'm still in time, Elisa, yes? Okay, that yes, with all of the challenges we have in cities that are increasing and are fast-paced, we need to find ways to make our territories resilient, while putting on democratic practices to make sure that our democracies are resilient as well. And we also have these issues of belonging and the question of increasingly complex identities that all of us have to take on with all of the different levels of territories, all the complex issues around us. And we need to create a sense of belonging at a local and a global scale at the same time, which is also the roles of democratic practices. So both challenges to have resilient territories and to create this common sense of belonging is something that we need to build together locally with the populations, local actors, stakeholders, inhabitants, city administrations, with the help, of course, of Europe, of the European Union in those projects. And I think it's only together that we can rise up to these challenges today and try and implement time and time again different type of innovative democratic processes at the local scale with the help of each other. Of course, peer learning is key. I didn't mention it, but in the Unites project, having also the democratic practices of other cities and having expert advice was incredibly valuable in implementing what we did. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really inspiring and a great closing of this. So thank you so much for this, and thank you for giving us a very good example that can be, I would say, also viewed and implemented within also different sectors. So it was an excellent example of the collaboration and the importance of the collaboration among different stakeholders on local ground. So moving close to the closing of the session, actually, and opening up for your questions. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I got one question, actually two questions from Steve, where he's wondering on how to participate in the program, at which cost. A couple of more participants asked about the cost. So the accelerator is free. It's within the Nets4Dem program, so it's funded by Horizon. And also just adding on Paul's comment as well. So all the activities and all the programs that are going to be, all the support that is going to be provided through Nets4Dem is free for the participants. And the other one, and I would actually switch this question to Zoe, is does one need to have a specific project for the program, or can it be generic? So I would like to forward this question to Zoe and ask you, Zoe, from previous experience, if participants come with a specific project that they are looking to further develop through the accelerator program versus those that are just interested in the topic, and then through the accelerator they are developing something. So what would be your suggestion, and what would you actually propose to the future participants?
And that's a really good question. I think you definitely don't need a full plan. You don't need to say, I want to do this kind of process with these kinds of issues in this kind of time frame. That's something you could come with some of that, but we'll help you to think about all of those constraints and contexts and issues through the program. what you do need is an idea of an issue you want to tackle with the tools of democratic innovation. You don't need to know which methods or which tools you want to use, but you do need to have a sense of, here's a challenge that I think a democratic innovation would be suitable for. So I would come with an initial idea of a challenge that you can write a bit about in your application, but it doesn't need to be fleshed out, and you don't need to know the plan or the solution or the answer yet. We'll do that together.
But maybe just to highlight again the importance of the collaboration between the two. I've also seen throughout the chat that some say, well, unfortunately, we are the local government, but actually, no, we are supporting the local governments also to come forward and to apply for the accelerator. But it would be really meaningful if you are coming in a partnership with a CSO, with another organization that can support your work locally. Zoe, is there something from the previous experience that you would like to mention in regard to this, highlighting this collaboration between organizations?
Yeah, in our last cohort of the Climate Accelerator program, we had 5 lead participants coming from government, and then 10 were coming from CSOs. But except for one, they all had a link with the opposite. So all of our governments had a sense of which local organizations or CSOs that they could work with to engage citizens, to think and complicate their thinking around the issue that they're trying to tackle. And similarly, the civil society organization leads that we were working with all had ideas about which policies they were trying to impact or influence, or the particular aspects of the challenges they were trying to address that would interact with local government. To really think about that sustainability piece is a big part of why we encourage partnerships. So not just how to run a good process, but how to make sure the outcomes of that process become embedded, become taken up, and go on to inform and shape the lives of people in that place.
Perfect. Thank you, Zoe, for that. So I see that we are about a minute before 12. So before giving you a link to apply for the accelerator, maybe Sahib, just a very quick reflection on the example. So the mixed methods, you have mentioned about it. So just maybe just like
yeah,
half
so
a minute.
Brian,
Yeah.
yes, of course. So just for everyone else, as Brian just asked about Messina very quickly. In short, the process involved mixed methods alongside an advocacy. So it involved DemSoc, so Democratic Society, that was helping run it on the ground, alongside a local councillor, 2 academics, and 1 NGO. There was the mayor involved as well as the deputy mayor, and it was a program that ran over about 1.5 years to nearly 2 years. And the final thing was in 2019. The one things I would say is that there was a lot of experimentation involved. The mixed methods that tended to work very well from my conversations with people on the ground were the urban explorations. So taking councillors from one part of town where they normally did their work to a completely different part of town, where there were more minorities, where there were more excluded and marginalized groups, to see what the problems being faced were, and then to have town hall meetings in those areas, to have genuine citizen dialogue, which would then translate into forms of policymaking. The other thing I would point out is that citizen engagement began at the very beginning. So there was a question posed to citizens of, hey, we need to engage you better. How do you think that engagement should look? And citizens responded with 5 or 6 or 7 proposals on what they thought citizen engagement should look like or could look like. And it was from that basis, then this series of experiments actually opened up. But the 2 things I would say is, 1, it involved some element of money. 2, it involved a strong network. 3, it involved experimentation face-to-face and on the ground.
Okay.
But yes, I'll leave it there because there's a lot more that can be said on this. But Brian, feel free to email me if you want to know more.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sahib. And I see also Zoe is commenting in the chat. But just since we are at time, I just wanted to share the QR code where you can apply. So today the applications are open. So feel free to apply. Feel free to send us an email with additional questions if you have. In regard to the accelerator, in regard to the programs, feel free to check the People Power website to see about the examples from the previous accelerators, and feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you all to the speakers for their time and for the expertise shared here. It was really, hopefully it was informative, but also interesting and inspiring for your future programs locally. So thank you so much.